The apex predator bowed, not to power, but to humanity's calm. In the year 2147, Earth was no longer alone. For centuries, humanity had looked up at the stars and wondered if they were being watched. Now it seemed the answer had finally come, not in whispers or shadows, but in a thunderous arrival that left the world holding its breath. The Caliph had arrived. Their ships descended from the blackness of space like jagged mountains falling from the sky. They glimmered with an otherworldly light, their surfaces shimmering as though alive. Panic rippled across the globe as news networks scrambled to cover the event. Governments convened emergency meetings, military forces went on high alert, and ordinary people stared out their windows, wondering if this was the end of everything. Amid the chaos, two individuals found themselves thrust into the heart of what would become humanity's greatest test. Daniel Harper, a linguist known for his calm demeanor, had spent years studying ancient languages and preparing for the possibility of alien contact. He wasn't a soldier or a politician. He was simply a man who believed that words could bridge even the widest gaps. Beside him stood Claire Bennett, a xenobiologist whose fascination with extraterrestrial life had driven her career. She had always dreamed of meeting beings from another world, but now that the moment had arrived, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. The Caliph ambassador landed in New York City under heavy security. The streets were empty except for armed troops and government officials, all waiting anxiously to see what kind of being would step out of the ship. When the hatch opened, a figure emerged that defied imagination. It was taller than any human, its body covered in shifting metallic scales that caught the sunlight and threw it back in dazzling patterns. Its eyes glowed faintly, and when it spoke, its voice rumbled like distant thunder, translated through advanced devices into something humans could understand. "I am Vraxthor," the creature announced, its tone commanding yet unreadable. "We are the apex predators of existence. Speak, fragile ones, what purpose do you serve?" Daniel stepped forward, his heart pounding but his expression steady. He knew this moment would define not just his life, but the fate of billions. Behind him, Claire clenched her fists, reminding herself to breathe. Together, they represented humanity, its fears, its hopes, and its potential. "Vraxthor," Daniel began, choosing his words carefully. "We are humans. We are explorers, creators, and dreamers. We seek understanding, not conflict." His voice carried a quiet strength that surprised even himself. Vraxthor tilted its massive head, studying him with an intensity that made Daniel feel as though he were being dissected. "You claim to seek understanding," it said, "yet your history speaks of war and destruction. Why should we believe you are more than animals fighting over scraps?" Claire stepped forward before Daniel could respond. "Because we learn," she said firmly. "Yes, we've made mistakes. Terrible ones. But every mistake teaches us how to be better. That's what makes us unique." For a long moment, Vraxthor said nothing. Then, without warning, it raised one of its clawed hands and pointed toward the horizon. "Prove it," it commanded. "If you wish to survive, you will face trials. Trials that will test your worth. Fail, and you will perish. Succeed, and perhaps you may earn our respect." With that, the ambassador turned and returned to its ship, leaving behind a stunned crowd. As the vessel ascended back into the sky, Daniel and Claire exchanged a glance. They both knew this was only the beginning. Back at a secure facility, they joined a team of scientists, diplomats, and military personnel tasked with preparing for the trials. Tensions ran high as debates erupted over how best to approach the Caliph. General Hayes, a gruff man with a reputation for aggression, argued that humanity needed to show strength above all else. "These creatures respect power," he insisted. "If we don't fight back, they'll see us as weak." But Daniel disagreed. "Strength isn't just about weapons or force," he countered. "It's about resilience, adaptability, and the ability to find solutions when there seem to be none. If we go in guns blazing, we're proving exactly what they think of us, that we're nothing more than violent animals." Claire nodded in agreement. "And besides," she added, "we don't know enough about them yet. Rushing in blindly could make things worse. Despite their arguments, the decision ultimately fell to Daniel and Claire to lead humanity's response. Their first trial came sooner than expected. A message from the Caliph appeared on every screen around the world. A labyrinthine structure materialized in the middle of the desert, along with instructions for solving a complex puzzle within its walls. Only those who succeeded would gain access to further communication with the Caliph. Teams from various countries attempted the challenge, but most failed miserably. Some grew frustrated and gave up, while others succumbed to panic when faced with dead ends or traps. Watching these failures unfold, Daniel realized that brute force or sheer determination wouldn't be enough. This was a test of intellect and patience. He and Claire decided to enter the labyrinth themselves. Armed with nothing but their wits and a shared belief in cooperation, they navigated the twisting corridors together. Along the way, they encountered strange symbols etched into the walls, puzzles that required creative thinking, and illusions designed to confuse and disorient. At times, it felt impossible to continue, but they encouraged each other to keep going. Finally, after hours of effort, they reached the center of the maze. There they found a pedestal glowing softly, surrounded by intricate carvings. Daniel placed his hand on it, and a surge of energy pulsed through the air. Moments later, Vraxthor's voice echoed around them. "You have passed the first trial," it said, "but this is only the beginning. Prepare yourselves, humans. Your next challenge awaits." As they exited the labyrinth, exhausted but triumphant, Daniel and Claire knew they had proven something important, not just to the Caliph, but to themselves. Humanity might be small and fragile compared to the towering aliens, but it possessed qualities that couldn't be measured by size or strength. Qualities like courage, ingenuity, and the willingness to work together. Little did they know, the hardest tests were still ahead. But for now, they allowed themselves a brief moment of hope. If they could face the unknown with calm resolve, perhaps, they truly had a chance to change the Caliph's perception of humanity and ensure a future where peace rather than fear ruled the stars. The apex predator bowed, not to power but to humanity's calm. After the first trial in the labyrinth, humanity was left with a mix of relief and dread. While Daniel Harper and Claire Bennett had succeeded where others had failed, the Caliph's message was clear. This was only the beginning. The alien race wasn't interested in small victories. They wanted to see if humanity could endure challenges that pushed them to their limits. And the next test would prove far more difficult than anyone could have imagined. It began without warning. One morning, as people went about their routines, the world suddenly plunged into darkness. Power grids across the globe failed simultaneously, leaving cities shrouded in shadows. Traffic lights stopped working. Hospitals struggled to keep life support machines running, and communication networks collapsed. Panic spread like wildfire. Without electricity, modern society ground to a halt. At first, many assumed it was an attack, a deliberate strike by the Caliph to cripple humanity. Military leaders scrambled to respond, while conspiracy theories erupted online. Some believed the aliens were testing Earth's defenses, others thought they were preparing for invasion. Amid the chaos, Daniel and Claire worked tirelessly to understand what was happening. "They're not attacking us," Claire said, studying data on a dimly lit laptop powered by a backup generator. "This isn't destruction, it's disruption. They're forcing us to adapt." Daniel nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. Adaptation is part of survival. Maybe this is their way of seeing how we handle losing something we depend on so completely. But adaptation wasn't easy. As hours turned into days, the lack of power took its toll. Food spoiled in refrigerators. Water pumps stopped functioning and tempers flared. Riots broke out in major cities as desperate crowds looted stores and clashed with authorities. Governments tried to maintain order, but without coordination or resources, their efforts often made things worse. For Daniel and Claire, the challenge became personal when tragedy struck. Claire's younger brother, Ethan, had joined a volunteer group delivering supplies to affected areas. He was young, idealistic, and eager to help, but inexperienced. During one mission, a bridge collapsed under the weight of fleeing civilians, and Ethan was among those who didn't make it out alive. When Claire heard the news, she crumpled to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Daniel found her sitting alone in a corner of the makeshift command center, clutching a photo of Ethan. Her usual determination had been replaced by raw grief. "It's not fair," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He didn't deserve this. None of them did." Daniel knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're right, it's not fair, but giving up won't bring him back. If we stop now, everything he believed in, the hope he had for a better future, it'll all be for nothing." Claire looked at him, her eyes red and swollen. "How can I keep going? How can I face this?" "Together," Daniel replied firmly. "We do it together. That's what humanity does best. We support each other even when it feels impossible." Slowly, Claire nodded. She wiped her tears and stood up, resolving to honor Ethan's memory by continuing their mission. Together, she and Daniel turned, their focus back to solving the crisis. They realized that brute force wouldn't restore power. It would take ingenuity. Using whatever materials they could scavenge, they worked alongside engineers to create temporary solutions. Solar panels were repurposed, generators were jury-rigged, and wind turbines were hastily assembled. In some places, communities came together to share candles, lanterns, and stories around fires, finding strength in connection rather than fear. Their breakthrough came when Claire discovered a pattern in the power failures. The Caliph hadn't simply shut down Earth systems. They had embedded hidden codes within the energy grid. These codes acted like puzzles, waiting to be deciphered. With Daniel's linguistic expertise and Claire's understanding of alien technology, they cracked the first code, which allowed them to partially restore power to critical infrastructure. As lights flickered back on in hospitals and emergency shelters, people cheered, not just because they had electricity again, but because it meant humanity hadn't given up. Word of their success spread quickly, inspiring others to follow their lead. Slowly but surely, pieces of the world began to recover. When the Caliph finally reappeared, Vraxthor's towering form cast a long shadow over the exhausted humans gathered before it. Its glowing eyes scanned the crowd, lingering briefly on Daniel and Claire. "You have endured," it rumbled. "Even in the absence of light, you found ways to persevere. This is unexpected." Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady despite his fatigue. "Humans aren't perfect. We make mistakes, and sometimes we hurt each other. But we also find ways to rebuild, to heal. Isn't that worth something?" Vraxthor tilted its head, considering his words. For a moment there was silence, then it spoke again. "Perhaps. But endurance alone is not enough. Your next trial will demand more than resilience. It will require unity and sacrifice." With that, the alien ambassador disappeared, leaving humanity to brace itself for what lay ahead. In the days that followed, tensions among Earth's leaders reached a breaking point. General Hayes, frustrated by the passive approach Daniel and Claire advocated, argued for a preemptive strike against the Caliph. "We can't keep rolling over and playing nice," he barked during a heated meeting. "If we show weakness, they'll crush us," Daniel countered calmly, though his patience was wearing thin. "Attacking them won't solve anything. They're testing us, yes, but not just our strength. They want to see if we can rise above our instincts. If we lash out now, we'll prove their worst assumptions true." Claire added, "And besides, do you really think we stand a chance against them? Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. Fighting them head-on would be suicide." The debate raged on, dividing those who favored aggression from those who supported diplomacy. Meanwhile, rumors circulated that certain governments were secretly developing weapons to use against the Caliph. When Claire uncovered evidence of these covert operations, she confronted Daniel privately. "This is exactly what they're looking for," she said, her tone urgent. "If they see us building weapons, they'll think we're no different from any other predator species. All our progress will be undone." Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know. But fear drives people to act irrationally. We need to show them another way. A better way." Their disagreement put a strain on their partnership, but before it could fracture completely, the third trial arrived. Unlike the previous ones, this one came with a stark ultimatum. Humanity would face Calith warriors in a simulated battlefield. Failure to impress the aliens would result in Earth's annihilation. General Hayes seized the opportunity to implement his aggressive strategy, leading teams of soldiers into the simulation. But the Calith combatants moved with terrifying speed and precision, overwhelming human forces with ease. Casualties mounted rapidly and morale plummeted. Watching from the sidelines, Daniel and Claire realized that brute force wouldn't win this battle. Instead, they needed to demonstrate something else entirely, something the Calith might not expect. "We have to try something different," Daniel said quietly. "Something bold." Claire looked at him, her expression wary but curious. "What are you thinking?" Daniel hesitated, then straightened his posture. "Leave that to me." Without waiting for approval, he stepped onto the battlefield, unarmed and exposed. The sight of a lone human walking toward the Calith warriors stunned both sides into silence. Even Vraxthor, observing from above, seemed intrigued. "Why? Do you come unarmed?" Vraxthor boomed, its voice echoing across the field. Daniel raised his hands, palms open in a gesture of peace. "Because I'm not here to fight," he replied. "I'm here to talk. To show you that humanity's greatest strength isn't our weapons or our armies. It's our ability to connect, to understand, to choose empathy over violence." For a long moment, Vraxthor stared at him, its glowing eyes unreadable. Then, without warning, it raised a massive claw and signaled for the simulation to end. The battlefield dissolved into nothingness, leaving Daniel standing alone in an empty expanse. "You are unusual," Vraxthor said, its tone softer than before. "Perhaps there is more to your kind than I anticipated." Though the trial had ended, Daniel knew the real work was far from over. Humanity still had much to prove, not just to the Calith, but to itself. But as he rejoined Claire, he allowed himself a small smile. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could change the Calith's perception of humanity and secure a future where coexistence was possible. The apex predator bowed, not to power, but to humanity's calm. After the battlefield simulation, humanity was left with a fragile sense of hope. Daniel Harper and Claire Bennett had managed to avoid catastrophe by showing the Calith something unexpected: courage without aggression, strength through vulnerability. But while the alien ambassador, Vraxthor, seemed intrigued, it made no promises. The Calith were still watching, judging, testing, and their next trial would push humanity even further. In the days that followed, tensions on Earth began to ease slightly. Power had been partially restored in many areas, and people were slowly rebuilding their lives. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Governments argued over how to proceed. Military leaders clashed with diplomats, and ordinary citizens grew restless. Some believed the Calith were playing games with them, dragging out these trials for their own amusement. Others thought the aliens were simply waiting for humanity to fail so they could justify wiping them out. Daniel and Claire found themselves at the center of it all. They had become symbols of humanity's resistance, not through force, but through resilience and ingenuity. Yet their differing perspectives sometimes put them at odds. Claire, driven by grief over her brother Ethan's death, wanted to take bigger risks to prove humanity's worth. Daniel, on the other hand, insisted on caution, believing that patience and understanding were key to earning the Calith's respect. Their disagreements came to a head during a meeting with world leaders. General Hayes, who still favored an aggressive approach, slammed his fist on the table. "Enough talk," he barked. "We've shown them we can adapt, we can endure, and we can think creatively. What more do they want? If they keep pushing us, we'll push back." Claire stood up, her voice sharp. "And what good will that do? Every time we act like animals fighting for survival, we prove their point, that we're unworthy of living." Daniel stepped in before the argument escalated further. "Both of you have valid points," he said calmly. "But we need to focus on what matters most. Showing the Calith that we're more than our instincts. We're capable of growth, of change. That's what sets us apart." The room fell silent as everyone considered his words. For now, cooler heads prevailed. But Daniel knew it was only a matter of time before fear and frustration boiled over. Again, then came the announcement. A message from the Caliph appeared across every screen worldwide. Prepare yourselves. Your third trial begins now. With those ominous words, the skies above Earth darkened once more. Not from clouds or storms, but from a massive shadow cast by one of the Caliph's ships descending toward the planet. This time, the trial wasn't just about solving puzzles or enduring hardships. It was personal. The Caliph demanded that humanity choose a single representative to speak directly to their council. This individual would stand alone, unarmed, and unprotected, tasked with convincing the Caliph that humanity deserved to exist. The news sent shockwaves through governments and communities alike. Who could possibly shoulder such a responsibility? Debates raged, with some suggesting politicians, others advocating for scientists, and a few even proposing soldiers. But when Claire volunteered herself, the room fell silent. You? General, Hayes asked, incredulous. You're not a leader, you're not a fighter, you're a biologist. And that's exactly why I should go, Claire replied, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was proposing. I'm not doing this because I'm brave or special. I'm doing it because I believe in what makes us human. The small things that give life meaning. Love, curiosity, connection. If anyone can show the Caliph who we really are, it's me. Daniel looked at her, concern etched on his face. Claire, this is dangerous. You'll be completely exposed. I know, she said softly. But someone has to do it. And if I can honor Ethan's memory by giving humanity a chance, then it's worth it. Reluctantly, the decision was made. Claire would represent humanity before the Caliph Council. As preparations began, Daniel worked tirelessly to help her prepare. He shared stories of human history, art, and culture, hoping to inspire her with examples of humanity's best qualities. Together, they crafted a speech that highlighted not just humanity's achievements, but also its struggles and capacity for growth. When the day arrived, Claire stood at the edge of a vast platform, surrounded by towering Caliph warriors. Their metallic forms gleamed ominously in the dim light, and their glowing eyes seemed to pierce straight through her. At the center of the group stood Vrax Thor, its presence commanding and unnerving. Speak, human, Vrax Thor commanded, its voice resonating like rolling thunder. Convince us of your worth. Claire took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had rehearsed her words countless times, but now, facing the alien council, she realized that memorized speeches wouldn't be enough. Instead, she spoke from the heart. My name is Claire Bennett, she began, her voice trembling but clear. I am not a soldier, a leader, or a hero. I am just one person among billions. But in my smallness, I carry the hopes and dreams of all humanity. She paused, looking around at the towering beings surrounding her. We are flawed. We make mistakes. We hurt each other, sometimes intentionally, sometimes without realizing it. But we also heal. We learn. We create beauty out of pain, hope out of despair. We build bridges where there are chasms, and we reach out to one another, even when we're afraid. Her gaze locked onto Vrax Thor. You call yourselves apex predators, but I wonder, what does it mean to be truly powerful? Is it about domination, destruction, or is it about something deeper, something harder to achieve? She stepped forward, her voice growing stronger. Humanity is alive. Fragile, yes, but deeply, beautifully alive. We don't always understand each other and we don't always agree, but we keep trying. We keep reaching for something better even when it feels impossible. That's what makes us worthy. For a long moment, silence hung in the air. The Caliph Council members exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Then Vrax Thor moved, a slow, deliberate motion that drew everyone's attention. To Claire's astonishment, the massive alien bowed its head, not in submission but in acknowledgement. You have given us much to consider, it said, its tone softer than ever before. "Perhaps your kind is more than we believed." With that, the council departed, leaving Claire standing alone on the platform. Tears streamed down her face, not from fear or relief, but from the overwhelming realization that she had done it. She had spoken for humanity, and they had listened. Back on Earth, news of Claire's success spread quickly. People celebrated, not just because they had survived another trial, but because they had proven something important. Humanity wasn't defined by its weapons or its wealth. It was defined by its spirit. As Daniel embraced Claire upon her return, he felt a surge of pride, not just for her, but for all of humanity. They had faced unimaginable challenges and emerged stronger, united not by fear, but by hope. But as the Calith ship disappeared into the stars, both Daniel and Claire knew the journey wasn't over. The trials had changed them, forcing them to confront their fears, doubts, and beliefs. And though the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear. Humanity had taken its first steps toward proving that it belonged among the stars, not as conquerors, but as equals. For now, the world breathed a collective sigh of relief. But deep down, everyone knew the real work was just beginning. The apex predator bowed, not to power, but to humanity's calm. After Claire Bennett's speech before the Calith Council, humanity was left in a fragile state of hope. Vraxthor's unexpected bow had been a sign that the aliens were reconsidering their assumptions about humans. Yet no promises were made. The Calith remained silent for days, their massive ships hovering silently above Earth like ominous shadows. People around the world waited anxiously, unsure if the trials were truly over or if another test loomed on the horizon. During this time, Daniel, Harper, and Claire found themselves reflecting on everything they had been through. They had faced impossible challenges together: labyrinths, power outages, battles, and personal sacrifices. Each trial had tested not just their abilities, but their beliefs about humanity itself. And while they had succeeded so far, the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on them. Claire, in particular, struggled with the aftermath of her encounter with the Calith Council. Standing alone before those towering beings had been terrifying, but it had also forced her to confront her own fears and doubts. She had spoken for humanity, but now she wondered if her words had truly been enough. What if the Calith decided that humanity still wasn't worthy? What if all their efforts had been in vain? Daniel noticed her unease and tried to reassure her. "You did more than anyone could have asked," he said one evening, as they sat together in a quiet room at the command center. "You showed them who we are, not perfect, but trying. That's all anyone can do." "I know," Claire replied softly, staring at her hands. "But sometimes I wonder, what if trying isn't enough?" Before Daniel could respond, an urgent message interrupted their conversation. The Calith had reappeared, and this time, they weren't issuing a new trial. Instead, they extended an invitation for humanity to visit their home world. The announcement sent shockwaves through Earth's governments and scientific communities. Some saw it as an opportunity to learn more about the Calith and perhaps even negotiate peace. Others viewed it as a trap, fearing that sending representatives into alien territory would leave humanity vulnerable. Debates raged for days until a decision was finally reached. A small delegation would travel to the Calith's planet, escorted by their ships. Daniel and Claire were chosen to lead the mission. Both felt a mix of excitement and dread. On one hand, this was a chance to understand the Calith better, to see their culture, their way of life, and perhaps find common ground. On the other hand, stepping onto an alien world filled with beings who considered themselves apex predators was undeniably dangerous. As preparations began, tensions ran high. General Hayes argued against sending civilians like Daniel and Claire, insisting that soldiers should accompany the delegation instead. "We don't know what they're planning," he growled during a heated meeting. "For all we know, they'll capture us the moment we set foot on their planet." But Daniel countered calmly, "If we go in armed and ready for war, we'll only confirm their belief that we're aggressive and untrustworthy. We need to show them that we're willing to take risks, Not because we're weak, but because we believe in cooperation. In the end, the delegation included a mix of scientists, diplomats, and a small security team, enough to ensure safety without appearing hostile. As the day of departure approached, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that this journey would change everything, for better or worse. The trip to the Calith's planet was unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. Their ship moved faster than any human vessel, traversing vast distances in mere hours. Through the windows, stars streaked past like rivers of light, and the sheer speed left everyone breathless. When they arrived, the sight of the Calith's world took their breath away once more. It was a planet unlike Earth, harsh and metallic with jagged mountains rising into skies streaked with strange colors. The air shimmered with energy, and the ground seemed to pulse faintly as though alive. Towering structures made of shifting, liquid-like metal dominated the landscape, blending seamlessly with the environment. It was both beautiful and intimidating. The delegation disembarked. They were greeted by Vraxthor and several other Calith warriors. The aliens' presence was overwhelming, their size and power making the humans feel small and fragile. But there was something else in their demeanor, a hint of curiosity, perhaps even respect. "Welcome to our world," Vraxthor said, its voice echoing deeply. "Here, you will witness what it means to be the apex predator." Over the next few days, Daniel and Claire explored the Calith society alongside their hosts. They learned that the Calith valued strength above all else, not just physical power, but mental and emotional resilience as well. Their culture revolved around proving dominance, whether through combat, problem-solving, or acts of bravery. Weakness was seen as a flaw, something to be eradicated. But as they observed the Calith's daily lives, Daniel and Claire began to notice cracks beneath the surface. Despite their emphasis on strength, the Calith seemed haunted by fear. Not of others, but of themselves. They constantly tested each other, seeking validation and reassurance. Even Vraxthor, who exuded confidence, occasionally revealed moments of doubt when speaking privately with Daniel and Claire. One night, after a long day of exploration, Claire approached Vraxthor cautiously. "Why do you value strength so much?" she asked. "Is it because you believe it makes you superior?" Vraxthor hesitated, its glowing eyes dimming slightly. "Strength ensures survival," it replied. "Without it, we would perish. Our history is filled with those who failed to adapt, who grew weak and were consumed. But doesn't focusing only on strength make you miss other important things?" Claire pressed gently. "Things like connection, compassion, or understanding." Vraxthor tilted its head, considering her words. For a moment, it looked almost uncertain. Then it turned away, ending the conversation abruptly. Back on their ship that evening, Daniel and Claire discussed what they had learned. "They're scared?" Claire said quietly. "Not of us, but of becoming obsolete. That's why they cling to strength. It's how they define themselves. And maybe that's why they've been testing us," Daniel added thoughtfully. "To see if we offer something different, something they've lost or never had." Their realization gave them a new sense of purpose. If the Calith were searching for meaning beyond their rigid worldview, then humanity had a chance to teach them something valuable. The question was how to convey such a complex idea without provoking hostility. On their final day, the delegation was invited to attend a gathering of the Calith Council. The event was unlike anything they had ever witnessed, a display of power and precision, with warriors demonstrating their skills in combat simulations and intellectual challenges. It was clear that the Calith took pride in their abilities, yet there was an underlying tension, as though they were constantly striving to prove themselves. When the demonstrations ended, Vraxthor addressed the crowd and the humans. "You have seen our strength," it declared. "Now tell us, what do you offer that we do not possess?" Daniel stepped forward, his heart pounding. He glanced at Claire, who nodded encouragingly, then spoke. "What we offer is simple yet profound. We offer connection, the ability to see beyond ourselves and find meaning in others. We may not be as strong as you, but we are united by our shared humanity. Together we create art, solve problems, and build bridges where none existed before. He paused, letting his words sink in. You call yourselves apex predators, but true strength isn't about domination. It's about balance, about knowing when to fight and when to listen. The room fell silent. The Caliph council members exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Finally, Fraxthor raised its massive hand, signaling for silence. Its glowing eyes locked onto Daniel's. You speak of concepts we do not fully understand, it said slowly. But perhaps there is wisdom in your words. With that, the gathering ended, and the humans were escorted back to their ship. As they prepared to leave, Fraxthor approached Daniel and Claire one last time. Your kind has given us much to consider, it said. Perhaps there is room for coexistence between us. Though no formal agreement was made, the tone of the Caliph's message was clear. Humanity had earned their respect, not through force but through understanding. As the ship ascended into space, carrying its passengers back to Earth, Daniel and Claire allowed themselves a moment of quiet hope. They had faced unimaginable challenges and emerged changed, but stronger. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear. Humanity had taken its first steps toward proving that it belonged among the stars. The apex predator bowed, not to power, but to humanity's calm. When the delegation returned to Earth, they brought with them a fragile sense of hope. The Caliph had not promised peace, but their parting words suggested that humanity might have earned a chance at coexistence. For Daniel Harper and Claire Bennett, the journey back home was filled with reflection. They had seen the Caliph's world, witnessed their culture, and even glimpsed their fears. It was clear now that the aliens were not just testing humanity, they were searching for something deeper, something they themselves lacked. As news of the mission spread, people around the world reacted in different ways. Some celebrated, believing the worst was over and that the Caliph would leave Earth alone. Others remained skeptical, convinced that the aliens could still turn hostile at any moment. Governments scrambled to prepare for both possibilities, while scientists worked tirelessly to analyze the data collected during the trip. But for Daniel and Claire, there was no time to rest. They knew that the Caliph's curiosity about humanity wasn't satisfied yet. If anything, their visit to the alien planet had only deepened the questions. What did it mean to be human? How could they show the Caliph that strength wasn't just about domination or survival? It was also about connection, compassion, and growth. Their next step came unexpectedly. A message from the Caliph appeared on every screen worldwide. Prove your worth once more. Show us what makes you unique. At first, no one understood what the trial entailed. There were no puzzles, no battles, no disruptions to Earth systems. Instead, the Caliph sent a single instruction: share your stories. It was a request unlike anything they had faced before. Stories. What did the Caliph want with tales of human life? Some dismissed it as a trick, thinking the aliens were mocking them. But Daniel and Claire saw an opportunity. This wasn't a test of physical strength or intellectual prowess, it was a test of heart. Over the next few days, they gathered a team of storytellers from across the globe. Writers, musicians, artists, historians, all were invited to contribute. Together, they created a collection of narratives that captured the essence of humanity: love and loss, triumph and failure, laughter and tears. These weren't grand epics or tales of conquest. They were simple, relatable moments that revealed the beauty and complexity of being human. One story came from a farmer in Africa who spoke of planting seeds under the scorching sun, knowing that his crops might fail but continuing anyway because it gave him purpose. Another was told by a grandmother in Europe who shared how she taught her grandchildren to bake bread, passing down traditions through generations. A young boy in Asia described building a kite with his father and watching it soar into the sky, feeling like he could fly too. Claire herself contributed a story about her brother Ethan, how his laughter used to light up a room, how he dreamed of becoming an astronaut, and how his death had shattered her but also pushed her to fight harder for humanity's future. Her voice broke as she recounted these memories, but she finished with a smile, saying, "Even though he's gone, his spirit lives on in everything I do." Daniel added his own tale, a quiet moment from his childhood when he sat with his mother under a starry sky. She pointed out constellations and told him that each star represented someone who had lived and loved before him. "You're part of something bigger," she had said. That night stayed with Daniel forever, reminding him that humanity wasn't defined by individuals but by the connections between them. When the stories were ready, they were broadcast directly to the Caliph ships. No one knew if the aliens would understand or care. Music played alongside images of bustling cities, quiet forests, and crowded family dinners. Paintings and photographs depicted scenes of joy, sorrow, and everyday life. Voices from every corner of the world spoke of dreams, struggles, and hopes for the future. For hours, nothing happened. The Caliph remained silent, their massive ships hovering silently above Earth. People began to worry that their efforts had been wasted. Had they misunderstood the trial? Was this another way for the Caliph to mock humanity's vulnerability? Then, late at night, Vraxthor appeared on screens worldwide. Its glowing eyes scanned the audience as it spoke, its voice resonating deeply. "We have listened to your stories. We have seen your art, heard your music, and felt your emotions. You claim these things define you, but why?" Daniel stepped forward, his heart racing. He took a deep breath and replied, "Because they remind us of who we are and who we can become. Stories connect us. They teach us to see the world through someone else's eyes. They help us heal, grow, and dream. Without them, we wouldn't be human." Vraxthor tilted its head, considering his answer. "Your kind is strange," it said finally. "You cling to fleeting moments, fragile bonds, and intangible ideas. Yet these things give you strength. They make you unpredictable." Its tone softened slightly, almost as if it were speaking to itself. Perhaps unpredictability is its own form of power. With those cryptic words, the transmission ended. The Caliph's ships remained in orbit, but their presence felt less threatening. Somehow, it was as though the aliens were observing humanity with new eyes, not as prey or rivals, but as something uniquely valuable. In the weeks that followed, Earth settled into an uneasy calm. The trials seemed to have paused, giving humanity a chance to catch its breath. But Daniel and Claire knew better than to assume the Caliph were done. Their curiosity about humanity ran deeper than anyone had anticipated, and the aliens would likely return with more questions, or more tests. Still, there was a shift in how people viewed themselves. The act of sharing stories had reminded everyone of what truly mattered, not wealth, power, or technology, but the connections that bound them together. Communities came together to celebrate their differences and find common ground. Artists painted murals depicting unity, musicians composed songs about resilience, and writers penned essays exploring the human condition. Even General Hayes, who had always favored aggression, began to soften his stance. Watching the global response to the Caliph's request, he admitted reluctantly, "Maybe there's something to this whole soft power thing after all." Claire smiled faintly at his comment but didn't argue. She had learned that change often came slowly, especially when fear and pride stood in the way. What mattered was that progress was happening, however small. As autumn settled over the northern hemisphere, Daniel and Claire found themselves walking through a park near the command center. Leaves crunched beneath their feet, and the air carried a crisp chill. They talked quietly about the future, about what might come next with the Caliph and how humanity could continue to prove its worth. "You know," Claire said after a long silence, "I used to think we'd have to fight. For our survival, that showing strength meant proving we were tough enough to stand against anything. And now?" Daniel asked, glancing at her. "Now I think strength is about staying true to who we are," she replied softly. "Even when it's hard. Even when it feels like the whole universe is against us." Daniel nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "That's what makes us human. And maybe that's what makes us special." Above them, the stars twinkled brightly, indifferent to the struggles below. Somewhere out there, the Caliph watched and waited. But for now, humanity had proven something important, not just to the aliens, but to themselves. They had shown that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they could find meaning in connection, courage in vulnerability, and strength in their shared humanity. And perhaps, Daniel thought as he gazed upward, that was enough. The apex predator bowed, not to power, but to humanity's calm. Weeks passed after the Caliph's last message, and Earth remained in a tense but hopeful state. The aliens had retreated into silence, their ships still orbiting high above, the planet like silent sentinels. Humanity waited, unsure if another trial was coming or if the Caliph were simply observing. In the meantime, life on Earth began to settle into a fragile rhythm of normalcy. Daniel Harper and Claire Bennett spent their days analyzing everything they had learned about the Caliph. They pored over recordings of previous trials, studied the alien language, and debated what might come next. What they couldn't ignore was the growing realization that the Caliph weren't just testing humanity, they were learning from them. Each trial had revealed something new about human nature, and it seemed that the aliens were starting to see value in qualities they didn't possess themselves: empathy, creativity, and connection. But as peaceful as things appeared on the surface, cracks were forming beneath. Governments argued over how to prepare for the future. Some wanted to continue pursuing diplomacy, while others pushed for developing weapons capable of defending against the Caliph. General Hayes grew increasingly frustrated with Daniel and Claire's cautious approach. "We can't keep rolling over and hoping they'll leave us alone," he snapped during one heated meeting. "If we don't show them we're ready to fight, they'll see us as weak," Claire shot back, her voice sharp but controlled. "Fighting won't solve anything. Every time we act out of fear, we prove their worst assumptions about us. We need to stay calm and focus on what makes us different, not stronger, but better." Daniel stepped in before the argument could escalate further. "Both sides have valid points," he said evenly. "But right now, our best chance lies in showing the Caliph that we're more than just survivors. We're creators, thinkers, and dreamers. That's what sets us apart." His words quieted the room, but the tension lingered. Everyone knew that the Caliph could return at any moment, and no one was sure what form their next trial would take. Then one evening, the skies lit up with an eerie glow. A massive projection appeared in the atmosphere, visible across the globe. It wasn't a message this time, it was an image. The Caliph had broadcast a holographic representation of Earth, rotating slowly against the backdrop of space. Surrounding the planet were glowing symbols, pulsing faintly like heartbeats. Vraxthor's voice boomed across every communication channel. "Your final trial begins now. Prove your worth, or face extinction." People froze where they stood, staring at the sky in stunned silence. What did the symbols mean? Was this a puzzle, a warning, or something else entirely? Daniel and Claire rushed to the command center, where scientists and linguists worked frantically to decipher the symbols. Hours turned into days as they analyzed patterns, cross-referenced data, and tested theories. Slowly, a pattern emerged. The symbols represented moments in human history, moments of triumph, failure, unity, and division. Some depicted great achievements, like landing on the moon or curing diseases. Others showed darker times, like wars, plagues, and environmental disasters. "It's not just about solving this," Claire realized aloud. "They want us to confront our past, to acknowledge both the good and the bad." Daniel nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. "And maybe they want us to choose which parts of ourselves we want to carry forward." The revelation sparked a global conversation. People gathered in town halls, schools, and online forums to discuss the meaning of the trial. Debates erupted over which moments truly defined humanity. Should they celebrate their technological advancements or focus on their capacity for compassion? Should they highlight their resilience in the face of adversity, or admit their mistakes and vow to do better? As the discussion spread, something remarkable happened. Communities came together in ways they hadn't before. Artists painted murals depicting both the beauty and flaws of human history. Musicians composed songs that honored heroes while acknowledging villains. Writers penned essays exploring the complexities of human nature. Even children joined in, drawing pictures of what they hoped humanity's future might look like. The Caliph watched silently, their ships unmoving as the world grappled with the challenge. For the first time, humanity wasn't just reacting to the aliens, they were actively shaping their response. And in doing so, they were proving something profound, that growth came not from perfection, but from reflection. When the deadline for the trial arrived, Daniel and Claire stood side by side in front of a worldwide audience. Behind them was a mosaic created by people from every corner of the globe, a patchwork of images, words, and symbols representing humanity's shared story. Some pieces were bright and hopeful, others were dark and painful. Together, they formed a complete picture of who humans were and who they aspired to be. Vraxthor materialized before them, its towering form casting a long shadow. Its glowing eyes scanned the mosaic, lingering on certain sections longer than others. Finally it spoke. "You have chosen to show us not just your strengths, but your weaknesses. Why?" Claire stepped forward, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Because hiding our flaws doesn't make us stronger, it makes us dishonest. By facing our past, we can learn from it. By admitting our mistakes, we can grow. That's what being human means." Daniel added, "And that's why we think we deserve a place in the universe. Not because we're perfect, but because we're willing to try, to improve, to become something better." For a long moment, Vraxthor was silent. Then, without warning, it raised one of its massive arms and touched the mosaic. The symbols glowed brighter, pulsing in sync with the aliens' movements. When it finally lowered its hand, the projection in the sky changed. Instead of Earth surrounded by symbols, there was a single image, a tree, its branches reaching toward the stars. "You have shown us something we did not expect," Vraxthor said, its tone softer than ever before. "Perhaps strength is not about domination or even survival. Perhaps it is about growth, about becoming." With those words, the Caliph ambassador bowed, not out of submission, but out of respect. It was a gesture unprecedented in their culture, symbolizing recognition of an equal. As the Caliph's ships began to ascend into the sky, leaving Earth behind, a collective sigh of relief swept across the planet. People cheered, cried, and embraced one another, knowing they had faced the ultimate test and emerged victorious, not through force but through understanding. In the days that followed, Daniel and Claire reflected on everything they had been through. They had faced unimaginable challenges, confronted their own fears, and ultimately helped humanity prove its worth. But they also knew that the journey wasn't over. The Caliph might return someday, and when they did, humanity would need to be ready. For now, though, there was peace. And in that peace there was hope. As they stood together under a starry sky, Claire looked at Daniel and smiled. "Do you think we really changed them?" she asked quietly. "I think we changed each other," he replied. "That's what happens. When you connect, when you share your stories, your struggles, your dreams, you find common ground even with someone, or something, as different as the Caliph." Above them the stars twinkled brightly, reminding them of how small yet significant humanity truly was. Somewhere out there, the Caliph continued their journey, carrying with them a newfound understanding of what it meant to be alive. And on Earth, humanity took its first steps toward a brighter future, not as conquerors or victims, but as storytellers, dreamers, and builders of bridges. The apex predator bowed, not to power but to humanity's calm. After the Caliph departed, Earth entered a new chapter. The alien's final gesture, a bow of respect, had left humanity with a sense of cautious optimism. For the first time in months, people allowed themselves to breathe freely. The skies were clear, the streets buzzed with renewed energy, and conversations shifted from survival to possibility. Yet, beneath the surface, questions lingered. What had the Caliph truly taken away from their encounters with humanity? Would they return someday? And if they did, would humanity be ready? Daniel Harper and Claire Bennett found themselves at the heart of these reflections. Though the immediate threat had passed, they couldn't shake the feeling that their work wasn't done. The trials had changed them deeply, forcing them to confront not just the Caliph, but their own beliefs about strength, vulnerability, and what it meant to be human. They knew that the lessons learned during those harrowing weeks would shape humanity's future, for better or worse. In the months that followed, Daniel and Claire traveled the world, sharing their experiences and insights. They spoke at universities, community centers, and international conferences, urging people to embrace the qualities that had earned the Caliph's respect: empathy, creativity, and resilience. Their message resonated with many, sparking movements, aimed at fostering unity and understanding across cultures. Artists created works inspired by the trials, scientists collaborated on projects exploring alien communication, and educators incorporated lessons about coexistence into school curriculums. But not everyone was convinced. General Hayes, still wary of the Caliph, argued that humanity needed to prepare for war rather than peace. "We got lucky this time," he said during a televised interview. "But next time they might not be so forgiving. We need weapons, not speeches." His words struck a chord with some, particularly those who had lost loved ones during the trials. Protests erupted in several cities, with demonstrators demanding stronger defenses against potential threats from space. Tensions between advocates of diplomacy and supporters of militarization grew, threatening to undo the fragile unity that had emerged after the Caliph's departure. Claire faced criticism head-on during one such protest. Standing on a makeshift stage in front of a crowd divided by fear and hope, she raised her voice above the noise. "Yes, we should prepare for the unknown," she said firmly. "But preparation doesn't mean giving in to fear. It means building a future where we don't have to fight because we've already proven our worth." Her words didn't sway everyone, but they gave pause to many. Slowly, the protests subsided, replaced by conversations about how humanity could balance caution with courage. Meanwhile, Daniel delved deeper into studying the Caliph. Using data collected during their encounters, he worked alongside linguists and xenobiologists to decode more of the aliens' language and culture. What, he discovered, surprised him. The Caliph weren't as monolithic as they appeared. Their society was riddled with contradictions. On one hand, they valued strength and dominance, viewing themselves as apex predators destined to rule. On the other hand, their interactions with humanity revealed cracks in that belief system, hints of doubt, curiosity, and even admiration for traits they lacked. One night, while reviewing recordings of Vraxthor's speeches, Daniel noticed something he hadn't before. The alien's tone had shifted subtly over time, from commanding and dismissive to reflective and almost uncertain. It was as though the Caliph leader had been affected by its encounters with humans, forced to question long-held assumptions about power and purpose. Daniel shared his findings with Claire, who listened intently. "Do you think they're changing, too?" she asked when he finished. "I think they're starting to," Daniel replied thoughtfully. "Maybe not all of them, but Vraxthor definitely seemed different by the end, like it saw something in us that challenged its worldview." Claire smiled faintly. "Good, maybe that's enough for now." As the year drew to a close, humanity marked the anniversary of the Caliph's arrival with a global celebration. Cities lit up with fireworks, music filled the air, and people gathered in parks and squares to share stories of hope and resilience. In New York City, Daniel and Claire stood together on a stage overlooking Central Park, watching as thousands of candles flickered in the darkness below. "This is what we fought for," Claire whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the crowd. "Not just survival, but connection." Daniel nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And maybe that's why the Caliph bowed, because they saw something in us they didn't have, something worth respecting." Their moment of reflection was interrupted by a sudden commotion near the edge of the park. A child ran toward the stage, clutching a small object in her hands. When she reached them, she held it out shyly, a drawing of Earth surrounded by stars with stick figures holding hands beneath the words, "Thank you." Claire knelt down, taking the picture gently. "Did you make this for us?" she asked softly. The girl nodded, her cheeks flushing pink. "For everyone," she corrected, "because we're all part of the story." Claire hugged her tightly, then stood up and held the drawing aloft for the crowd to see. Cheers erupted, echoing through the night like a promise. No matter what challenges lay ahead, humanity would face them together. That night, as Daniel and Claire walked home under a canopy of stars, they talked quietly about the future. Neither knew if the Caliph would return or what form their next encounter might take. But they agreed on one thing. Humanity had proven it could rise above fear and division when it mattered most. "You know," Daniel said after a long silence, "I used to think the Caliph were testing us to see if we were worthy of living, but now I think they were searching for something else." "What?" Claire asked, glancing at him. "Hope," he replied simply. "A reason to believe that strength isn't just about domination, that there's another way to exist in the universe." Claire smiled, her gaze drifting upward to the stars. "And maybe we gave them that." Above them, the sky stretched endlessly, vast and mysterious. Somewhere out there, the Caliph continued their journey, carrying with them fragments of humanity's story. Whether they returned or not, their presence had left an indelible mark, not just on Earth but on themselves. As Daniel and Claire stepped inside, leaving the cool night air behind, they felt a quiet sense of peace. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time humanity had a map to guide them, one written not in battles or conquests, but in moments of connection, courage, and calm. And perhaps they thought as they turned off the lights, that was enough. The apex predator bowed, not to power but to humanity's calm. Years passed since the Caliph's departure, and Earth changed in ways no one could have predicted. The trials had left an indelible mark on humanity, not just as individuals, but as a collective species. People were more aware of their shared fragility and strength, their capacity for both destruction and creation. The fear that once gripped the world gave way to something quieter yet more profound: hope. Daniel Harper and Claire Bennett continued their work, though their roles evolved over time. They became symbols of resilience, not because they sought fame, but because their actions had inspired others. Daniel focused on teaching, sharing lessons from the trials with students eager to understand what it meant to face the unknown with courage. Claire dedicated herself to science, working on projects aimed at bridging gaps between cultures and fostering global unity. Together, they remained a steady presence, reminding the world of how far it had come, and how much farther it still needed to go. Despite the progress, reminders of the Caliph lingered. Their ships had vanished into the stars, but their influence stayed behind. In the stories people told, the art they created, and the questions they asked about humanity's place in the universe. Some believed the aliens would never return, while others thought it was only a matter of time before they came back. For now, there was peace, but it was a fragile kind of calm, like the quiet before a storm. One evening, as Daniel sat in his small office filled with books and notes, he received an unexpected message. It wasn't delivered through screens or speakers. It arrived as a faint hum resonating deep within his chest. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but when he stepped outside, he saw others looking up at the sky. A single Caliph ship descended slowly, its metallic surface shimmering under the moonlight. Claire joined him moments later, her expression unreadable. "Do you think this is it?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," Daniel admitted, "but we'll face it together." The ship landed in a remote desert, far from cities and crowds. When Daniel and Claire arrived, accompanied by a small delegation of scientists and diplomats, they found Vraxthor waiting for them. The alien stood tall and imposing, its glowing eyes scanning the group with an intensity that made everyone tense. "You called us here," Daniel said, stepping forward cautiously. "Why?" Vraxthor tilted its massive head, studying him. "We have been changed," it rumbled, its voice softer than before. Your stories, your actions, they linger in our thoughts. We do not understand them fully, but we cannot ignore them. Claire stepped closer, her heart pounding. What do you mean? The Caliph have always defined ourselves by strength, Vraxthor continued. But strength alone is hollow. It does not bring meaning, it does not answer the questions we carry within us. It paused, its gaze shifting to the horizon. You humans, fragile, flawed, yet unyieldingly hopeful, you have shown us another path, one we did not believe existed. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then, without warning, Vraxthor lowered itself to one knee, bowing deeply. A gesture so unprecedented that it left the humans stunned. This wasn't the polite nod it had given years ago. This was an act of humility, of acknowledgement. You teach us what it means to endure, not through force but through spirit, Vraxthor said. Perhaps there is room for coexistence, between predator and prey, between strength and calm. The days that followed were filled with dialogue. Humanity and the Caliph began to share knowledge, exchanging ideas about technology, culture, and philosophy. The aliens revealed that their obsession with dominance stemmed from a deep-seated fear of extinction, a belief that only the strongest deserved to survive. But their encounters with humans had planted seeds of doubt, forcing them to reconsider their values. In turn, humans learned about the Caliph's struggles, their internal conflicts, their isolation among the stars, and their longing for connection. Though vastly different, the two species found common ground in their shared desire for growth and understanding. Daniel and Claire played key roles in these discussions, serving as mediators and guides. They helped translate not just language, but emotions and intentions, ensuring that both sides moved forward with mutual respect. Their efforts weren't always easy. Misunderstandings arose, tempers flared, and old fears resurfaced. But each challenge brought them closer to a future where coexistence might be possible. As months turned into years, the relationship between humanity and the Caliph grew stronger. Joint missions explored distant planets, seeking resources and knowledge to benefit both species. Scientists collaborated on projects aimed at solving environmental crises on Earth, using Caliph technology to heal damaged ecosystems. Artists created works that blended human creativity with alien precision, resulting in breathtaking displays of cultural fusion. General Hayes, who had once advocated for aggression, eventually softened his stance. Watching the Caliph interact with humans, not as conquerors but as partners, he realized that strength didn't have to mean domination. Maybe I was wrong, he admitted during a meeting. Maybe we're stronger when we work together. His words echoed across the globe, inspiring others to embrace collaboration over conflict. Slowly but surely, humanity began to redefine what it meant to be powerful, not through weapons or wealth, but through compassion, innovation, and unity. One night, as Daniel and Claire stood side by side beneath a starry sky, they reflected on everything they had witnessed. The journey hadn't been easy, and the road ahead would still hold challenges. But they knew they had achieved something remarkable, not just for themselves, but for all of humanity. Do you ever wonder if we'll see them again? Claire asked softly, her eyes fixed on the constellations above. The Caliph, Daniel replied. I think they'll always be out there, watching, learning, growing, just like us. And maybe someday, Claire added, we'll meet them, again, not as strangers but as equals. Daniel smiled faintly, reaching out to take her hand. Until then, we keep building. Keep hoping. That's what makes us human. Above them, the stars twinkled brightly, indifferent yet eternal. Somewhere among them, the Caliph traveled onward, carrying fragments of humanity's story, and perhaps pieces of their own transformation. On Earth, life continued, shaped by the lessons of the past and the possibilities of the future. And, in that moment under the vastness of the cosmos, Daniel and Claire felt a quiet sense of peace. Humanity had faced the ultimate test and emerged changed for the better. Whatever came next, they knew they were ready. Not because they were perfect, but because they were alive, deeply and beautifully so. Together they turned away from the stars and walked back toward the warmth of home, ready to write the next chapter of humanity's story. One written not in battles or conquests, but in moments of connection, courage, and calm.